Welcome to Elevate Wellness Group. I'm Gil, director at Elevate. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here today because we're tackling a topic that literally flips conventional medical wisdom right on its head. It's kind of like a massive medical plot twist. Today, our big goal is to completely shift how we understand estrogen's role in the male body. You know, for decades, estrogen in men has been treated like this annoying nuisance, especially when we talk about testosterone replacement therapy. But the emerging science and clinical data, well, they're telling us a completely different, deeply fascinating story. So let's just dive right in. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with estrogen controversy. Look at endocrine versus intracrine systems, explore exactly why men need estrogen, tackle the testing myth, and finally, rethink standard care. So, kicking things off with Section 1, the estrogen controversy. Right now, there's a seriously fierce debate surrounding standard hormone replacement protocols for men. Traditionally, when men get prescribed testosterone, they're almost automatically handed an aromatase inhibitor too. And that's a drug specifically designed to block the body from converting that testosterone into estrogen. But you know, clinical researchers who are actually pushing back against this practice are facing some incredible headwinds. One clinician who advocates for just leaving estrogen alone put it like this: I've been met with a lot of debate and a lot of resistance. I've been called every name in the book, and that pushback is coming from both the general public and other medical providers. Challenging the status quo was never easy, right? Even when you literally bring hard clinical findings to the table. And this brings us to the counterintuitive hook of today's video. Clinicians are actually finding that when transfer patients come into their clinics already taking these estrogen blocking drugs, simply taking the guys off the aromatase inhibitors results in massive, significant symptom improvement. The patients get better objectively when you look at their biomarkers and subjectively and how they actually feel day to day. So, how in the world is that possible if estrogen is supposed to be so bad for men? Well, the answer to that, we move to Section 2, endocrine versus intracrine. This is where we uncover the core scientific misunderstanding that explains why those patients actually got better. Basically, it all comes down to two very different physiological processes. Now, what's really fascinating here is this concept of intracrinology. This is backed by an extensive review from Laval University. And get this, intracrinology isn't even brand new. The field actually dates all the way back to the 1980s. But man, is it vastly underappreciated. It essentially describes a system where active sex steroids are synthesized locally. We're talking right at their specific site of action inside the peripheral tissues all over the body. Okay, so absolutely crucial point here is separating the old systemic model from this cellular model. In your classical endocrine system, a gland secretes a hormone directly into the bloodstream, right? And it circulates systemically around your entire body. But in the intracrine system, it is entirely autonomous. It's all about self-regulated local cellular production of hormones. The cell literally makes what it needs, uses it right then and there, and it never enters systemic circulation. So why does this matter for men? Well, according to the Endocrine Society, a staggering 40 to 50% of all androgens in men are actually made right in those peripheral tissues, from adrenal, DHEA. Now let that sink in for a second. That's almost half. That previous in production is definitely not some minor biological footnote. It is a major, absolutely fundamental function of the human body. And the raw materials available for this process are just massive. In adult men, the levels of DHEA sulfate circulating in the body are unbelievable, like 100 to 500 times higher than testosterone and up to 10,000 times higher than estradiol. Basically, this means that there's a gigantic reservoir of raw substrate just floating around waiting to be converted into active hormones locally in those tissues exactly when and exactly where the cells need it. Which brings us right into section 3, why men need estrogen. Now, we get to the physiological why behind all of this. We know how the male body makes these hormones locally, but why on earth does it go out of its way to convert these substrates into estrogen right down at the cellular level? Well, the answer is that estrogen really isn't just a female hormone. In fact, research out of the Northwestern University School of Medicine highlights that estrogen is actually a huge metabolic powerhouse for men. It plays a totally critical role in keeping a man's energy balance and glucose homeostasis in check. Think of it like this. When estrogen is produced locally in a guy's tissues, it acts kind of like a cellular Swiss Army knife. It promotes insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscle and the liver. It acts as a really powerful anti-inflammatory. It prevents the harmful buildup of lipids, and it even regulates insulin secretion right there in the pancreatic beta cells. Local estrogen is basically a primary protector against systemic inflammation and metabolic breakdown. And because of that, we start to see the real dark side of blocking this hormone. Estrogen deficiency in men directly promotes metabolic dysfunction. The big takeaway for you here is that when you artificially inhibit a man's estrogen, say by handing him an aromatase inhibitor, you're literally stripping away his cellular metabolic protections. You are putting him on a fast track to obesity, pre-diabetic conditions, and potentially even full-blown type 2 diabetes. It's wild. This realization completely changes how we should be viewing patient care, which leads us right into section 4, the testing myth. Let's take this intracrine science, apply it straight to the clinic, and really look at standard testing procedures. Now, if you're following along with the logic so far, you'd probably ask, hey, if estrogen is so incredibly essential for men, why wouldn't a progressive doctor just test estradiol levels in the bloodstream to make sure everything's optimal? It makes total sense to ask this, right? Well, the answer brings us right back to intracrinology, because this estrogen is produced and utilized entirely inside the individual cell. Testing the bloodstream is honestly practically useless. Blood serum levels don't show you what the cell is actually doing. They only reflect the leftover metabolites that are on their way out to be excreted in the urine. You're basically just measuring the garbage the cell is throwing away. And that completely misses what the cell actually needs internally. And honestly, it's incredible. But a lot of the medical literature is plagued by this exact same error. Most clinical studies incorrectly infer biological actions just by looking at blood serum levels. They're still leaning on that old classical endocrine concept and completely ignoring the paracrine and autocrine actions, the stuff happening quietly outside of the bloodstream, right down at the cellular level. All of this brings us to our final section, section 5, rethinking standard care. We've looked at the science, we've uncovered the blind spots in testing, and now we really need to look at the momentum for actual, tangible change within the medical community. Because you know the calls for reform, they aren't just coming from the fringes anymore. Even top-tier experts, like Harvard's Dr. Abraham Morgentaler, are actively calling out these antiquated industry guidelines. In fact, he heavily criticized the American Urological Association, saying they urgently need to change their standards of care to actually reflect this new intracrine model. And the reality here is just stark. By introducing aromatase inhibitors into a man's system, we're not just tweaking some arbitrary number on a lab chart. No, we're systematically destroying the body's autonomous control over its own target tissues. We're literally blocking the exact mechanisms the body uses to adjust its local estrogen needs, the very things it uses to protect itself from disease. So that really leaves us with this one vital question to ponder. Are we just blindly treating outdated lab numbers because, well, that's the way it's always been done? Or is it finally time to embrace this fascinating intracrine science so we can truly heal the patient? The data here absolutely invites critical thinking, and it definitely demands a debate. Thank you so much for joining me for this Elevate Wellness exclusive. If you'd like to learn more about working with us towards your optimization goals, please visit us at elevatewellnessgroup.com and keep asking those tough questions. I'll see you the next time.